Hello again, my game dev friends. So, today we're going to start the kind of Resident Evil style slotted inventory system. One of the reasons for starting with this is that inventory and just UI in general is kind of tricky, honestly. So, if you're worried about kind of the gameplay stuff and how hard that's going to be to code and stuff, don't worry. UI is your enemy, at least in my experience. But I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible and kind of just explain my thought process as usual while I go on. So let's start. So we're going to end up with three different styles inventory systems, and they're going to be kind of interchangeable for the most part. So this is just for the case that you want a different kind of implementation of a menu for your game. So maybe you want the Resident Evil style, maybe you want the radial style like this, or maybe you want the Resident Evil 4 style where you can kind of rotate things around and be really OCD about how you pack your inventory. I know you do that. So we're going to start off with this one, as I said, and then next we'll move on to this one, and then after that we'll end with this one. But that might be a kind of an add-on later, depending on how much interest there is in doing it. I might just do these two first and then move on to some other things. It depends on how much interest we get for this. So in Unity, if you want to display anything on the UI, you need to use a canvas. So right click here, go down to UI, canvas. And the canvas is just an object that holds all of the different UI elements and handles everything to do with rendering them and scaling them, etc. All of that kind of stuff. So if you look over here, we're on screen space overlay as the render mode, which is what we want. But later on, we'll probably use a canvas with some different render modes as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is switch into 2D mode, which I can do up here, and then press F on the canvas while it's highlighted, and then you'll see it focuses out on the whole canvas. Now, to new kind of Unity users, this might seem weird that you've got the canvas kind of in the same 3D space as the room, but it is kind of weird, but I guess you'll get used to it. Okay, so let's start by adding the slots for our inventory. Now, what you can do is right click here, go down to UI, panel, okay? And I commonly use panels to put together things like, for example, this list of items, or a grid of items, I should say, that make up the slots is kind of a conceptual item panel, right? Item slot panel. So I'd have that as a panel. Anything that gets grouped together, I'd stick it in a panel. And it's nice because it gives you an image on there, which you can use or not. You can take it off if you want. But the important thing is just that it groups things together. You could actually just use an empty rect transform to do that. But I just like using panels for that. So within the panel, we're going to add a component here. Actually, I'm going to add it on a sub object. I'm going to make an image here, and I'm going to get rid of the image. And I'm just going to call this, I'm just going to add a component to this, sorry, called grid layout group. Okay. So, and I'm going to rename this from image to, let's call it item slot container. Okay. And I'll resize that to be around the size of the panel. And I'm going to add another image to this, which is not an image, sorry, I'm going to add a button using TextMesh Pro. The reason to use TextMesh Pro is it's basically the Unity default now. The old buttons and stuff are still here, but they're deprecated, so it's not advised to use them. So when you select this, you're going to have to import TMP Essentials. So just click that. Okay. And then it's there. Now, oh, there we go. It just jumped back into the position I wanted it to be. So this button, let's call it, is going to be a slot for the item. The reason I call it, well, the reason I've given it the button component is because it essentially has all the functionality that we want for an item slot, at least a lot of the functionality. So it can be selected using the arrow keys, WASD, or, you know, on a gamepad, whatever. It can have some different colored states for when it's selected, although we're going to create a separate kind of highlighting square for when things are selected, like in Resident Evil 2, at least. And it can also receive some input on when it's been pressed, either by clicking on it, although you could disable that later, or pressing the spacebar or whatever key you want to, you know, activate it. And then it can be triggered to open a context menu later. So why reinvent the wheel and make like some custom class to do all this stuff when we already have the functionality built in? So in here, I'm just gonna name this as item for now. There won't be text in it in the end. There'll be some image, I guess, for the weapon or herb or whatever you want, but this is just placeholder. So if I add another button here, and just before I do that, I'm going to make this a prefab straight away because it makes life easier when you're editing a lot of things. So I'm going to add a new folder in the assets called prefabs. And I'm just going to drag it in there after renaming it item slot prefab. Okay, so now if I duplicate this by pressing Control D, you can see that it kind of automatically fills into this grid shape, which is really cool. And the reason it does that is because we used this grid layout thing. As you can see, grid layout group. And if you wanted it to be, you know, like this or just long, you can do it however you want. You can also adjust the size of each element within the grid very easily. So I'll just show you how to do that after I wrangle this around a bit. It's probably to do with anchoring or something. I'm just going to disable the color of the panel now because it's just going to distract me. So if you go to the item slot container, container, that's not good. I just did it again. Oh, it's because of my stupid keyboard. My keyboard keeps failing keys recently, and I have to press them like several times. And it's like a half decent keyboard, so I don't know if I've got really heavy fat fingers or what. But anyway, cell size. So if you increase it on the x-axis, it's going to make them kind of larger that way. And obviously it does the inverse on the y-axis. Trying to remember to move things around with the panel. Yeah, there we go. I'm actually wanting them a bit smaller than this, I think. So maybe I'll just do it like this. We are at a widescreen resolution right now, so I think it'd be better if they were a little smaller. Just resize this panel again. Oh, that was the problem. Hang on. I should just be resizing with this, I guess. That's better. Well, UI stuff. That's better. Okay. So right now, these should be kind of interactable in a way. If I go into play mode, yeah, so we can already click on them, nothing happens, and we can actually already kind of highlight them with the keyboard. I don't know if it'll come through with the YouTube compression, but if you can see, or let me make it a better color. That'll make it easier. Pressed color, red. Oh, so it'll probably be selected color. Yeah, so as you can see, we can already navigate the menu like this, and you can press space right now to click it, which is cool, right? One thing we'll have to fix later is if you click off, you kind of lose focus, but I have a little fix for that. So let's make a little selector which can kind of go to each selected slot now. So not in this panel, but just in the, actually, yeah, just loose in the canvas. I'm going to create another image. I'm going to call this selector. Okay, and I'm going to make its color to be a nice green. And I'm going to give it a sprite of just UI sprite and take away fill center, which will mean that I can just resize it, as you can see, and then we can use this to show which item has been highlighted. Okay, now on here, I'm going to write selector view, create a new component called selector view. The reason to call it view is kind of a habit of mine for things that are just to do with visual aspects of your game. So this selector view does nothing to do with which item is actually selected. It has nothing to do with any of that kind of logic stuff. All it does is moves to the position of the selected item, if that makes sense. So it's not by marking it as view, I'm saying this shouldn't be messing around with which item I've selected. This shouldn't be important for the inventory system. It's just something that it's just a visual thing. Okay, so in the selector view, I'm gonna create a method for update, and I'm just gonna say var selected equals event system, and we're going to have to use Unity engine.eventsystems for this. If you're using Visual Studio Code, by the way, you can write out something that you don't have as a user yet, like some class from it, and then you can press Control and period, and that will let you kind of add it in just without doing it yourself. So eventsystem.current. So the event system keeps track of kind of, well, one of the things it keeps track of is which buttons and UI elements are selected right now. So selected, current selected game object. And now all I'm going to do is say transform.position, which is the position of the selector view, equals selected.transform.position. So right now we're just going to teleport it to the selected item. So let's see that working. And at the start, yeah, because nothing was selected at the start, it was giving me a null reference exception. So this current selected object can actually be null. So we can just say if selected equals null, return, which will mean that once we get to this point in our code, we'll just back out and we won't do anything under this. This is called a guard clause. It's essentially the same as saying if selected isn't null, then do the stuff in the curly braces. It's recommended to use a guard clause in the case where you're going to wrap like an entire method or huge part of a method inside curly braces, because it's just unnecessary. It's better for readability to just see, oh, okay, if it's null, return, which means I back out of here. And then in the next frame, this will get called again. And if it's not null, then it will continue. It will, go on from there. So this will stop that null reference exception. Okay, so now it hasn't selected anything because we don't by default select an item. But as you see, if I select something, then it's going to kind of follow along with that selection. Now, what about the width of it? Because we want it to kind of scale and stretch around this. So what we can say is transform. Well, actually, we need a reference to the rect transform. So the rect transform is essentially like the equivalent of transform, but just for UI elements. I'm not sure if it's the same for like 2D in general in Unity, because I don't really do that much 2D stuff. But it's essentially the same as transform, except it's got all of these other kind of UI specific stuff. So you don't really want to adjust the local scale of objects that have these attached, because you won't get the functionality you're looking for properly. So I need a reference to this rect transform because it's not actually on the mono behavior by default. So private rect transform, let's just call this rect transform, imaginative, I know. Okay, and we'll get that in our awake function as usual. Method, I should say, rect transform equals get component rect transform. Okay, so what we're going to say here is rect transform dot set position. Where is it? Set size with current anchors. The axis will be axis dot horizontal, and the size will be, and at this point we're going to need a reference to the selected game objects rect transform. So we're going to say var other rect equals selected dot get component rect transform. And this calling get component on update is not very efficient at all, but don't worry about it for now, because we can clean things up and work on performance later. Okay, so other rect dot size dot x. Okay, and then we just need to do the same for the vertical. And if you're using VS Code again, which I love VS Code, if you press Alt Shift on a line and then press down or up, you can duplicate that line, which is handy for when you've got to write very similar things. So if we set it to be the others rect transform size X and Y, then that should work now. Okay, so as you can see, now it kind of perfectly slots over there. You could have it a little bit better if you wanted. Bigger if you wanted, by just increasing this, like adding something to it. Now let's make it a little bit fancier and let's lerp these positions instead. So with the transform to position, all we're going to say is, and I should probably explain what a lerp is for people who don't know. Lerp is linear interpolation. It's a kind of like a way of smoothly moving between two values. So let me show you what it looks like, and that's probably a better way of doing it. So transform.position equals vector3.lerp, and transform.position is the first parameter, and then the second one will be what the position we want to end up at. So that'll be selected.transform.position. And the float t is kind of the time that we want. It's how fast it will do it. That's the better way to explain it. So I'm going to say speed, which doesn't exist yet, times time dot delta time. Again, multiplying by delta time to make sure that it runs the same independent of any frame rate. As you can see, this doesn't exist yet. So if I press Control period again, I can generate that variable up here. And I'm going to set it by default to something like 5. And I'm going to serialize this field so that we can muck around with it in the inspector. Okay. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so speed 5, it's serialized properly here. So as you can see, it kind of smoothly moves over there. There's another way of moving without the kind of the smooth curve. Like you can say move towards, and that will make it kind of move in a much more straightforward way, let's say. A fairly consistent pace. Let me move it up to 50. Yeah, see? So there's no kind of smoothing at the end. It just goes straight to the position. But I kind of like the lerp look. So I'm going to set this by default actually to 25. It won't change anything in the inspector right now, but just so that in case I delete this, I know what it should be around. Where did you go? Oh, so 25. Let's just test that again and get a nice speed for it. See, I quite like that speed. It's quite snappy. And yeah. Okay, let me show you another cool thing about this. If I create a button up here, like you've usually got an item that's kind of your current equipped, right? Let me have a look. Yeah, the equipped item you have right now, like in Resident Evil 2. So if I have this up here, let me name it current weapon, just so that I don't forget. So, oh, I need to make sure, this is another good time to explain something about UI. When you're using the canvas like this, anything on the bottom will automatically be rendered on top of everything above it. So in this case, I should move this selector not inside the button, never inside the button. I should just move it outside, underneath, sorry, the button, and now it should render on top. Yeah, as you can see. The reason it's not going red, by the way, is because I just haven't set the color on that button yet. But interestingly, it's going down to this button. I'd be interested to know why. There's a way of debugging like the way that the interactive stuff moves, but I can't remember how to do it right now. I feel like if I reposition it, it's gonna just, yeah, some weird thing with position, but you can manually set that stuff too. But as you can see, it resizes to fit whichever slot it will be going to. Okay, so let's let's also lerp the size of this because I think that could be cool too. So I'm going to create a variable which will be called horizontal lerp equals vector3 dot lerp, and then the first value will be rect transform dot size, sorry, dot rect dot x, no, width, sorry. And the second one will be the other rect dot size dot x. I guess I should just use this same here. And then we'll do it by the same speed factor right now. So time dot delta time times speed, or the other way around. It doesn't matter which way you do it in this case, but I'm gonna do it the same in both cases. Oh, it should be mathf.lerp, sorry. So that it's not, because we're not lerping between two vector threes, but a float. So, and we'll do the same for this vertical lerp. Okay, and we'll do size.y, size.y. And then when we set the size, we just set it to this new lerp thing. I've also want to show you a cool package for like easy tweening and lerp that I use for a lot of things, for small visual kind of things, because that can be really handy, but I think I won't do it in this episode. Okay, so yeah, so as you can see, it kind of smoothly goes between the sizes, which is really nice. I like it. Okay, so I'm going to make these buttons a little bit darker, give them a bit of flair, take away this red stuff. I might actually set these colors to be all the same because I don't want them to be shown by how sorry, I don't want you to see the state of them by the color, but by this selector. That's the thing that should tell you which item is selected, at least for now. Yeah, so I'm fairly happy with that. And again, you can play with these speeds all you want to get it to where you want it to be. If you want it to be really slow for some reason, or slower, you can do that. Or if you want it to be almost instant, you could put it up to like 5,000. But why would you do that, huh? Okay, so it's looking good. Oh, I just realized the time, so I'm going to end this video for here, but hopefully by the time I've put this out, I'll have the next one out, because I just don't want to go over 30 minutes, so I'm going to cut it into kind of 2 chunks. Don't forget to like and sub, please, if you want. Okay, see you on the next part.